The doorbell rang at the home of District Attorney Larry Noland. It happened in seconds.
Larry Noland?
Yes, how can I help you?
Don't go! Larry? Larry?
On September 10th, 1985, a low-flying plane raced across the night sky. Inside, two men put on skydiving gear. They put the plane on automatic pilot. When everything was ready, they jumped into the night. The next morning, one of the parachutists was found dead on a driveway in Knoxville, Tennessee. On his body, police found over $20 million worth of cocaine. The mysterious man was identified as Drew Thornton, a former narcotics officer from Lexington, Kentucky.
Lieutenant Day?
The detectives soon received yet another call, this time from officials in North Carolina.
The drug enforcement investigators called and stated that the remains of a plane had been recovered on North Carolina, and that it might be associated with the parachutists that had landed in Knoxville.
Clay County, North Carolina lay due east of Knoxville. Detective Day had no idea what he might find at the crash site. They hoped that somewhere in the twisted wreckage lay the clue to the identity of the mysterious dead man. In late summer 1985, officers in Tennessee were investigating the mysterious death of a parachutist. They suspected he had a partner, but had no leads as to his identity. On the dead man's body, investigators found weapons, cash, and millions of dollars worth of pure cocaine. They got a break when a fisherman in North Carolina contacted the local sheriff to report a plane crash. The accident occurred on September 11th at around 1 a.m.
A local fisherman who was night fishing on a lake near the Cherokee National Forest heard a low-flying aircraft approaching his location, and then it flew over him, which kept his attention. And then the next thing he notices is the flames from the impact of the aircraft hitting the mountain.
It took 5 hours for Detective Day and federal agents to hike to the crash site.
It was a very devastating crash site. You had trees which had been sheared off 3-4 feet above the ground, and there were probably 5 to 10 of those, which tell me that there was a major impact. When we got to the aircraft, one of the main things we were looking for was if there were any other bodies.
The plane was destroyed, but didn't have much burn damage. Apparently, there had been little fuel left when it crashed. There was no luggage, no flight documents, and no bodies. There were even few seats. Most had been ripped out, leaving the cabin hollow, a standard procedure in drug runs.
The N number on the aircraft matched the N number on the key that we found on the body in Knoxville. That was the connection for us between this aircraft and our skydiver.
But the biggest question was finally about to be answered. Word had come from Lexington, Kentucky on the identity of the dead man. One of the man's IDs was a fake, the other legitimate. Fingerprints confirmed it. Their victim's name was Andrew Carter Thornton II. Drew Thornton and his friends had made many contacts within the drug world.
The more we got into it, the more people started to surface, and then it was almost like a web. It started expanding out into different crimes, different people, different states, different countries.
The Kentucky State Police and the FBI opened investigations into the activities of Drew Thornton. They learned he had partnered with a friend of his, Frank Barkley, and opened a security business. Wherever Drew and Frank were, money was always being thrown around. The word on the street was their security business was an alleged front for the sale and distribution of marijuana.
We were mainly gathering intelligence reports and formulating a plan and trying to somehow verify some of these allegations.
Barkley was the money man. The two were known simply as the Company. Drew Thornton handled the supply side, acquiring weapons, vehicles, and drugs. The duo had a reputation of doing anything for a buck.
I think that Thornton prided himself on living on the edge, on being a soldier of fortune type person, on being almost invincible, that he could do anything.
Serial number 19.
Because of his dangerous lifestyle, Lieutenant Jerry Day and the Knoxville police were beginning to suspect that their skydiver had not died from a mere accident. Thornton, along with his friend Frank Barkley, ran a business they called the Company. The FBI believed it was a front for a drug smuggling operation. The men had connections in Las Vegas with a notorious pair of drug smugglers. Jimmy and Lee Chagra were believed to be two of the biggest and most dangerous drug traffickers in the country. The Chagra brothers made millions running drugs from the largest suppliers of Colombia's infamous Medellin cartel. The Company wanted a piece of their action. Agents began hearing from informants that Frank and Drew were going to start running drugs for the Chagras, and they were looking to expand their gang. They began scouring small and rural airports for pilots who could meet their criteria. By the late 1970s, the Company's drug-running operations were in full swing. With each run, they got better and were able to smuggle larger and larger amounts of contraband. For Barkley, this meant more money and more power. Drew and Frank wasted no time in using the Chagra's connections. They began buying as many drugs as they could afford in Colombia and shipping them to the U.S. When they landed in the U.S., unloading was done in record time by trained ground crews. They knew any delays could mean getting arrested within minutes. It seemed there was no limit to what the Company and the Chagras could achieve. But only a few months after the two groups teamed up, tragedy struck. Police in El Paso, Texas got a report that Lee Chagra was found shot to death in his office. Jimmy called Barkley for help. Unsure who had executed his brother, and fearing for his own life, Chagra had nowhere else to turn. Jimmy Chagra needed protection.
First thing in the morning.
He called in a favor from Frank Barkley. He asked the Company to protect him.
I'm going to need 3 plane tickets to Las Vegas. Wes, me, and Drew.
Seeing this as a possible opening to move in on the Chagra's empire, Frank agreed.
You're not going to Vegas without a plan. What are you doing?
He started making plans to beef up security in Chagra's Las Vegas home. Drew, however, was wary.
All I'm asking for is a couple of hours.
Working this closely with the Chagras meant more power and more risk.
Wait a minute, come on!
Any shakeup in the Chagra empire would inevitably cause trouble for the Company.
You're smarter than this. Don't do this. Come on!
Frank was determined not to let Jimmy Shaugra down. But Jimmy was in trouble. He was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, charged with importing marijuana and cocaine from Colombia. The prosecution had been gearing up for this case for months.
Judge, we're here to request a reduction in bail.
Bail was set at $1 million, an amount Shaugra's attorney argued was excessive.
My client, first of all, has no prior record, no pre...
U.S. District Judge Robert Drews agreed with the defense and lowered the bail.
Your Honor, there's plenty of
He vowed that if Shaugra was convicted, he would not get off easy. Jimmy had a long run just out of reach of the law. But this judge was known for being tough on drug dealers.
We have plenty.
May 29th, 1979. It was the first day of Jimmy Shaugra's trial, and Judge Drews had no idea what awaited him when he stepped from his home that morning. His wife heard the shot, but did not see the sniper. Paramedics responded quickly to the scene. News of the assassination of a federal judge reverberated in FBI offices across the U.S., including Lexington. Although the FBI suspected the company might somehow be involved, they, like the Texas police, had no proof. The death of Lee Shaugra had left a void that Barkley was only too willing to fill. Barkley had long had his eye on the Chagres drug empire. Yates told investigators Barkley was particularly seduced by this new world. It seemed a prime business opportunity.
She's gonna stay right here with me.
Combining assets with the Chagres had given them access to aircraft brokers and weapons experts.
Sorry about that.
And working directly with Colombia's top suppliers meant they no longer had to deal with the middleman. But Frank Barkley had a problem. He needed to come up with the cash to buy the drugs, and he didn't have any. But Barkley was ruthless in running his drug business. Tom Burke, one of the men accompanying Barkley, would learn that the hard way. Frank decided to leave Burke behind. For Barkley, it was a small price to pay to keep his drug lords satisfied. He was looking to make money, no matter who got hurt. He had to find a better way to pay for the drugs. Barkley came up with another plan. Investigators learned he found a source of drug money thousands of miles away at a naval station in California. Drew Thornton and Frank Barkley went from partners to competitors after they had a falling out and broke up their drug smuggling ring. In January 1980, ATF agents heard that Frank and his cousin John were staying at a hotel in Philadelphia. John was under investigation for stealing arms from the China Lake Naval Facility. ATF Special Agent Frank Eddy.
They were, tipping big tips to the maids. The maids were told at times to stay out of the rooms, not to make up the beds, not to do anything.
Their behavior made the staff suspicious.
Housekeeping.
At certain times, the maids did see firearms, guns in the rooms. They notified the Philadelphia police.
On January 4th, 1980, authorities raided the motel. They arrested John Barkley, charging him with firearms violations. But detectives had been told 2 men occupied the room. John Barkley told the cops where to find his cousin. He wasn't far. At the time of the raid, Frank Barkley was at a local airport. A Officials caught up with him minutes before he boarded his plane. He was found to be carrying semi-automatic weapons, commando daggers, several fraudulent IDs, and more than $22,000 in cash. Philadelphia police soon recognized that they had inadvertently busted members of a large-scale weapons network. They uncovered a small cache of weapons, silencers, and telephone scramblers.
When they raided the room, they found guns, certain other eavesdropping equipment. There was also some documents. One was a receipt for a storage facility in Lexington, Kentucky, and of course that piqued everybody's interest.
Agents had been tipped off that the door of the storage facility was booby-trapped.
And the door wasn't booby-trapped. We thought, well, you know, maybe something else is booby-trapped. I mean, here's all these weapons. There's boxes and cartons of ammunition and all kinds of stuff. So we had to be really careful about going through the individual items about, you know, when does this blow up? I mean, is this going to blow up in your face? Or what's in this box?
The assortment of weapons and military gear stunned the officers. Much of it consisted of items stolen from China Lake. A Starlight night scope, Soviet-made machine guns with anti-aircraft mounts, taser stun guns, an anti-tank gun, even semi-automatic M2 carbines. The arsenal was estimated to be worth $250,000.
I was very much surprised to find some of the type of weapons that they had. Just isn't something that the average person is going to have in their gun collection, you know. This, of course, indicated to us that these people are involved in some other type of activity. We started tracing the guns. One of the weapons, a .22 caliber survival rifle, was registered in the name of Andrew Thornton, and it had been purchased from a local gun dealer by the name of Mike Kelly.
It seemed an open and shut case. Investigators hoped the legal pressure on Barkley would push him to testify against Thornton and other members of the company. But Frank Barkley had other plans.
Mike Kelly was employed by some drug smugglers in South Florida to supply electronic equipment to a boat they were equipping for a shipment of marijuana being smuggled into Punta Gorda. In the process of this operation, Mike went to Florida, and when he was down there, an informant blew the whistle on the whole operation, and he was arrested.
Kelly denied any knowledge of the drug deal, but the ploy didn't work. He was found guilty of drug conspiracy charges. The first alleged member of the company was behind bars.
Mike Kelly was arrested in South Florida on the drug smuggling operation, and the prosecutor was pressuring him very hard to get his cooperation. That sent shockwaves throughout the group in Lexington.
Charlotte Harbor, Florida, January 16th, 1982. Shortly before 7 p.m., the doorbell rang at the home of District Attorney Larry Noland. It happened in seconds.
Larry Noland?
Yes, how can I help you?
Larry? Larry?
D.A. Noland was shot in the heart at point-blank range. He was declared dead at the scene. Detectives knew the victim. Noland was a criminal prosecutor known to be tough on drug runners. He was the same prosecutor pressuring Mike Kelly to name his criminal associates.
When the prosecutor was killed, his wife had overheard some conversation indicating that possibly he knew who the person was, and then she heard the shots ring out, and it was some indication that the killer was known to her husband.
According to an autopsy report, The assailant had used wad cutter bullets.
Most bullets have a rounded edge. These are flat with a hole in the center. And what it does when it enters the body, it rips and tears more than a straight bullet that would go straight through. It does more damage.
Officers canvassed the quiet, affluent neighborhood. A witness recalled seeing a woman with blonde hair in a blue jogging suit. She'd gotten into a car.
I'm Officer Schmitz.
Based on witness descriptions, a composite sketch of the woman was developed. A rental car agent identified Bonnie Kelly, Mike Kelly's wife, from the composite sketch of the alleged shooter. No one was surprised among the Kentucky State Police.
Well, it was everyone's suspicion that Bonnie killed the prosecutor. He had quite a reputation of being hard on drug people, people involved in drug trafficking, and I guess they thought they would have a better chance with someone else. Things were really beginning to hop. Things were beginning to come together. Information was coming fast and furious, and the heat was on. The group, I'm sure, knew it.
Bonnie, however, had a solid alibi.
I have a few questions for you right quick.
Harvey Walker, a close friend of Drew and Frank's, stepped forward claiming that he and Bonnie had been in a business meeting on the night in question. Agents had been keeping a close watch on Drew Thornton. In August, Drew made contact with an aircraft broker named Levi Schulman. He was unaware the aircraft broker was also a DEA informant.
Cessna is a good airplane.
Because Schulman couldn't be trusted, Agent Cobell and his partner kept close tabs on Drew Thornton. But Cobell knew the former police officer might quickly pick up on surveillance. They needed to be careful. Thornton had pulled onto Miami's Palmetto Expressway headed north. Cobell and his partner split up. They kept in contact about Thornton's location via a DEA radio frequency.
My partner and I were communicating on the radio, right, that Thornton's headed down to the next exit, because somebody's in the lead and then somebody stays behind on surveillance. So it becomes pretty clear that as we're communicating, Thornton begins rubbernecking more than just casual looking around. He's looking in the rearview mirror in the passenger's compartment. He's looking in the side rearview mirrors. He's looking for something. It's almost like as we're talking, he's listening to us. Thornton gets off at the next exit, and I communicate with my partner. I said, I don't think he's made us, but he knows something's going on. Let's get off him.
Agent Cobell's fears about tracking Thornton were justified. Schulman later told him Thornton had a scanner and had picked up Cobell's communications with his partner. Thornton disappeared that day. The investigators brought together all the information they gathered on Drew Thornton and pieced together the events leading up to his final flight. On September 10th, 1985, Drew Thornton and a co-pilot arrived in Columbia ready to pick up a substantial load, 800 pounds of cocaine, packed in a series of large black duffel bags. The deal was going down, but the DEA had no idea. Schulman had held out on them. Several hours into the flight, somewhere over the southern U.S., Drew noticed it, a plane in the distance. He was convinced they were being followed. Thornton ordered his pilot to lose the plane. But the aircraft in pursuit was larger and gaining fast. Knoxville, Tennessee Police Detective Jerry Day.
We surmised that Andrew and his accomplice had thought they had picked up an air tail either from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, or Customs, He had become very paranoid. We know that later on and through the investigation. He was a very paranoid individual. And he probably thought he was being followed.
For Thornton, there was no choice.
Give me the headphones.
He couldn't afford to be caught. He radioed Rachel, who was awaiting his arrival in Knoxville.
Rachel, do you copy? Rachel, do you copy?
Go for Rachel.
When interviewed by the DEA, Rachel refused to identify Thornton's accomplice or divulge many details.
We're going to have
But she confirmed that Thornton sounded panicked.
Drew,
He
you're
spoke
going
of
to
the
bail
chase
out of
plane.
the plane? What about our cargo?
And the need to bail out. Then he signed off for the last time. Rachel Gant never gave investigators any more information.
Rachel Gant was very loyal, protecting him right up to the end, and refused to testify before a grand jury in Knoxville, which resulted in her indictment. But to this day, I don't think she's ever betrayed his confidence. A pretty hardcore individual, in my opinion.
The men jumped at night, a dangerous prospect even for someone as seasoned as Thornton.
Don't worry, you're gonna be fine.
According to Gant, the pilot had never jumped before. His was a leap of faith. But Thornton welcomed the danger. Some said he thought he was invincible. But Thornton was not invincible. In fact, none of the gang escaped capture or prosecution.
They were a tight, close, knit group of friends, and I think that they fed on each other's adventures and misdeeds. In fact, I think they kind of fed on each other's crimes. The fact that and that they were all connected with each other, that they were somehow involved in the assassinations of both a federal judge and a federal prosecutor, I think speaks volumes about the fact that they thought that they were untouchable. They thought that they were capable of doing anything and trying anything and getting away with anything, and they did.
But when indictments and various trials were finally handed down, the company turned on its own, friend testifying against friend. Frank and John Barkley, Mike and Bonnie Kelly, and Harvey Walker were all found guilty on a variety of charges from murder to conspiracy. Only Mike Kelly's drug conviction was reversed on appeal. What happened to Drew Thornton, however, is still not entirely clear. The Knoxville, Tennessee medical examiner eventually declared his death an accident, the mysterious injuries most likely caused by a duffel bag, battering him all the way down. Or he may have struck the wing of his own plane when he jumped. But how such an experienced jumper could make such a mistake is unclear.